The second I saw her step onto my driveway in her leopard print flats and oversized sunglasses, I knew it was going to be one of those mornings. "Graham, open the gate," she snapped, pounding her acrylics on my side fence like she owned the place. Her name was Beverlyn Cresswood. Head of the HOA and self-proclaimed gatekeeper of our cul-de-sac in Ridge Bay Estates. She had the kind of voice that could make a leaf blower sound soothing and the personality of a traffic ticket. "Nope," I said, leaning against my porch railing with a coffee in hand. "This is my property." "You're not coming in." Beverlyn's face tensed like she had just bitten into a lemon. "I need to inspect your backyard. There's been a complaint." "From who?" I asked, already knowing the answer. She folded her arms. "That's confidential HOA business." "Then it's confidential homeowner property," I replied, motioning to the locked gate. "You're not getting in," she scoffed. "You're violating community standards with that shed you just built." I laughed under my breath. "It's under 10 feet tall, matches the house paint, and it's not visible from the road, all within code." Beverlyn turned red. "We'll see about that." She stormed off down the sidewalk, muttering something about non-compliance and fines. I went back inside. Now, here's the thing: Beverlyn had been gunning for me ever since I moved in 6 months ago. I'm a contractor. Built my place from the ground up on a corner lot that wasn't originally part of Ridge Bay Estates. When the HOA expanded boundaries last year, they strong-armed my street into joining. I didn't vote for it, neither did most of the neighbors. But Beverlyn, she saw our block as her new kingdom, and I was the only one not bowing. The next morning, I caught her on my property again. This time, she was holding her phone up and filming my backyard through the slats in my fence. I stepped out with my own phone recording. "You're trespassing." "I'm documenting," she said, not even turning around. "I've got no trespassing signs posted on both sides of the fence." She waved a hand like that didn't matter. "HOA rights override that." "They don't. You clearly don't understand how HOA covenants work." "I understand criminal trespassing laws better," I said. "Do you want to test them?" She turned, finally realizing I was filming. "Delete that footage?" "Nope." Her voice went up an octave. "You can't film me without my permission. You're on my property. You're lucky I haven't turned the sprinklers on." She marched right up to the gate and tried to open it. It was locked. She slammed her palm against it. "You're being combative and non-compliant, Graham." "I'll write you up for obstruction." "I hope you brought a pen," I said, pulling out my phone and dialing the sheriff's non-emergency number. "Because I'm done playing." She rolled her eyes. "Go ahead. The sheriff will tell you I have every right." Turns out the sheriff didn't say that. About 20 minutes later, Deputy Klein pulled up in his cruiser. I explained the situation, showed him the footage, and pointed out the signs on my fence. Beverlyn tried to cut in, but he held up a hand. "Ma'am, were you invited onto this property?" "I don't need an invitation." "I'm with the HOA." "That's not how this works," Klein said flatly. "You're not law enforcement, and HOA rules don't supersede state trespassing laws." Her mouth dropped. "You can't be serious." "I am." He pulled out his citation pad. "You're receiving a notice for criminal trespass." "You're lucky the homeowner's being generous and not pressing for full charges." Beverlyn's voice cracked. "But I was just doing an inspection." Klein handed her the citation. "Not without permission. And from what I see here, this homeowner's shed is fully compliant with municipal code. If the HOA has an issue, take it up in civil court, not by hopping fences." She started crying. Actual tears. "This is harassment. I am being harassed by my own residents." Klein looked at me. I just shrugged. "Ma'am," he said, "step off the property now." She turned, humiliated, and stormed off again, this time with a citation flapping in her hand like a scarlet letter, and I stood there sipping my coffee, finally enjoying the silence. 2 days after Deputy Klein handed Beverlyn her notice, a certified envelope showed up at my door. The HOA logo was stamped across the front like it was a legal threat. I opened it on my workbench, hands still covered in sawdust from a client's cedar deck I'd been working on. It was a formal notice of escalation. According to the paper, I was now under Level 3 review for refusal to cooperate with community oversight procedures. They even threw in a $750 fine. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so clearly desperate. This wasn't about a shed. This was Beverlyn trying to claw back control after her public embarrassment. I flipped the page. At the bottom, there was a line stating that any unpaid fines could result in a lien being placed on the property. That's when things stopped being funny. I drove straight to City Hall. Karen, the city records clerk, had platinum hair, a faded tattoo of a butterfly on her wrist, and a no-nonsense attitude I appreciated immediately. "You said Ridge Bay Estates sent this?" she asked, squinting at the letter. "Yep. Just got it today." She tapped the desk twice with her pen. "They've been trying to flex more authority since they expanded their coverage. You're on the edge of that annex, right? Corner lot on Willowbend," I said. She nodded. "That's what I thought. The annexation paperwork was contested. Council never finalized it." I froze. "You're saying my street isn't technically part of Ridge Bay?" "Not officially," Karen said, flipping through a binder. "They submitted a request last year, but it hit a snag, zoning conflict with the county. It's still under review." I felt a grin tug at the corners of my mouth. "So they've got no legal authority over my property?" "None whatsoever." "Not unless you signed a voluntary compliance agreement." "I didn't." "Then they're bluffing." I left with a copy of the council minutes and a scanned letter from the zoning commission confirming the annexation was pending, not approved. That night, I printed 25 copies and walked door to door along Willowbend. My neighbors, most of them retired, some with kids, others working swing shifts like me, had no idea. Beverlyn had told them we were officially under the HOA's jurisdiction. "She said we'd be fined if we didn't pay," said Mrs. Dobbins, a 70-year-old widow who lived 2 doors down. "I've been sending a monthly fee since January." "She's not just overstepping," I told her. "She's stealing." By the end of the night, I had 18 signatures on a joint complaint, and my neighbor Marcus, a former Army MP, offered to help deliver it to the city attorney. 3 days later, everything blew up. I came home from a job site to find caution tape stretched across my driveway. A laminated sign, zip-tied to my mailbox post, read "Construction Violation, Stop Work Order Issued by HOA." I tore it down and spotted Beverlyn across the street, arms folded like she was posing for a courtroom sketch. "You're tampering with official postings," she called out. "This is fake," I said. "You have no jurisdiction here." She strode toward me with a man trailing behind her. He was wiry, with a clipboard and a company polo that read "Crestmark Inspections." "You're not allowed to build structures without HOA approval," she said. "This man is a certified inspector. He documented everything." "From where?" I asked, stepping between them and my fence. "Because unless he had a drone, he couldn't see anything." The inspector cleared his throat. "I was invited to assess the property line encroachments." "So you trespassed too?" He hesitated. Beverlyn's nostrils flared. "I'm reporting both of you," I said. "And if I find out you accessed the back gate without consent, that's breaking and entering." Beverlyn's voice hit that shrill, glass-shattering pitch again. "You can't threaten us for doing our job." Just then, Marcus pulled up in his truck. He stepped out, calm as ever, and walked over holding a manila folder. "City attorney wants you to see this," he said, handing it to me. "They're opening a fraud investigation." "What?" Beverlyn snapped. Marcus didn't look at her. "Turns out, collecting fees from people under the false pretense of legal authority is a Class C felony in this county." The inspector took a step back. "I was just hired to do a visual report." "Then you might want to get yourself a lawyer," I said, opening the folder. "Because here's the kicker: your company isn't licensed for municipal code enforcement, and I've got security footage of your visit." The color drained from his face. Beverlyn turned to him. "You said you could certify violations." I said I could observe from public spaces, he stammered. "I never agreed to enter private property." "You were in my yard," I said. "You stepped over the side fence. I watched the whole thing from my work truck. Motion alerts caught everything. Beverlin's voice cracked again. This is a conspiracy. You're all conspiring to make me look like the villain. No, Marcus said. You're doing that on your own. 2 police cruisers pulled up less than 10 minutes later. This time they weren't there to hand out warnings. One of the officers had a printed copy of the zoning hearing minutes. The other had a list of addresses on Willowbend. We've confirmed that this block is not under Ridge Bay HOA jurisdiction, the officer said. Ma'am, we're placing you under arrest for fraud, criminal trespass, and impersonation of a public official. Beverlin gasped. This is absurd. I have rights. You're being read them now, the officer replied. As they cuffed her, the inspector quietly slipped away down the sidewalk, probably hoping no one noticed. But I'd already uploaded the footage of his fence hopping to a shared drive I'd given the city attorney. He wouldn't be slipping away from accountability that easily. Neighbors started gathering in front lawns, whispering and filming as Beverlin was placed in the back seat of the cruiser. Her sunglasses had fallen off, and for the first time, she looked genuinely confused. Like the world had stopped spinning the way she controlled it, Mrs. Dobbins came up beside me, holding a plastic cup of iced tea. I never thought I'd see the day, she said. I did, I said. She was sloppy. Entitled people always are, she nodded. You think they'll disband the HOA after this? No, I said. But they'll think twice about who they put in charge. That night, I sat on my porch with Marcus and a few neighbors as the sun dipped behind the trees. No more laminated threats. No more strangers in polo shirts peeking over fences. Just peace. And a fresh batch of paperwork for a class action suit we were drafting against Ridge Bay Estates for every illegal fee, every unauthorized threat, and every lie Beverlin had used to line her pockets. We weren't just ending her reign. We were making sure no one like her ever stood on our driveways again. The morning after Beverlin's arrest, a city maintenance truck rolled down Willowbend and stopped in front of the HOA's community message board, the one she had installed last month without permission, right at the entrance to our block. 2 workers in reflective vests pulled the whole thing out of the ground, bolts and all, and loaded it into the truck bed like they were taking out the trash. By mid-afternoon, the HOA's signs, bulletins, and mandatory compliance notices had vanished from every corner of our street. The illusion of control cracked, then crumbled. But that wasn't the end. At precisely 6:30 that evening, I heard a knock at the door. It was Deputy Klein again, this time with a plainclothes investigator beside him, Detective Reams, badge clipped to her belt and a notepad already open in her hand. We need to speak with you about what came out during the search of Beverlin Cresswood's home this morning, Reams said. I stepped aside and let them in. They didn't sit. Reams flipped a page in her notepad. We've obtained a warrant for her personal devices and HOA records. During the execution of that warrant, we discovered financial documents indicating she was funneling collected HOA dues into 2 separate accounts, one of which was a private investment portfolio registered under a shell LLC. I raised an eyebrow. She was skimming. Worse, Reams said. She was laundering. The funds were being channeled through a fake landscaping company that billed the HOA monthly for non-existent services. She approved the payments herself, then rerouted the funds. Klein added, we have at least 20 months of records showing consistent withdrawals and fake invoices. City finance auditors are involved now. I leaned against the kitchen counter and let that sink in. So this wasn't just about power trips and harassment. She was stealing real money. North of $80,000 so far, Reams said, and that's a conservative estimate. She handed me a document. It was a subpoena notice asking for video evidence from the day Beverlin brought the so-called inspector onto my property. I nodded and reached for the external hard drive I'd backed everything onto. She also had a tablet with security footage pulled from other homes, Reams went on. Several cameras were accessed remotely without permission. We're investigating how she got those feeds. That explains the weird flickering some of us noticed on our front door cameras, I said. We thought it was a glitch. She was running some kind of spyware. Not sophisticated, but just enough to intercept streams. We'll be issuing notices to your neighbors so they can have their systems checked. Klein glanced at Reams, then back at me. You might want to consider a network reset and a new router. Already did that yesterday, I said. Factory reset everything. Reams nodded approvingly, then moved to the next page in her notes. There's one more thing. During the search, we found a folder labeled Annexation Phase 2. It had printed maps with properties marked in red, including yours, Marcus's, and several others. The plan was to quietly submit another annexation request to the city with forged signatures from supposed resident approval. She was trying to force you into the HOA retroactively. That's fraud, I said. Exactly, Reams replied. But that submission never happened. We think she was waiting for the right political moment. The documents are dated 3 weeks ago. I handed over the hard drive. Let me know if you need anything else. As they left, I noticed 2 unfamiliar sedans parked at the far end of the cul-de-sac. Men in suits were stepping out, briefcases in hand. I didn't recognize them, but I didn't need to. The moment they walked into the old HOA clubhouse, I knew they were auditors. The clubhouse sat just outside the Willow Bend border, technically still within Ridge Bay's original zone. It had always been a sore spot, a miniature fortress of HOA authority complete with cameras, a keypad entry, and a framed portrait of Beverlyn in the lobby. None of us had ever been invited inside. Now, it was under a different kind of inspection. By the following week, the audit results leaked. An anonymous email containing internal HOA communications started circulating among residents. It had everything: emails between Beverlyn and her treasurer discussing convenient loopholes, minutes from unofficial meetings where votes were allegedly pre-decided, and even a scanned letter from a resident who tried to resign from the HOA board but was told that resignations require board approval. The neighborhood was furious. A town hall meeting was called not by the HOA, but by a coalition of Willow Bend residents who'd had enough. We held it in Marcus's large backyard, with folding chairs, a microphone, and a portable projector screen. Over 50 people showed up. Marcus stood at the front, holding up a physical copy of the leaked documents. We've been lied to, manipulated, and in some cases stolen from, he said. But that ends now. We're filing a petition with the city to dissolve the Ridge Bay Estates HOA entirely. There were murmurs, then applause. A woman in the second row asked, "Can we do that legally?" A man stepped forward from the back. I hadn't met him before, but he introduced himself as Raymond Lynn, a real estate attorney who'd bought a home on our street last year. "Yes," he said. "If we gather signatures from 2/3 of the residents and prove financial misconduct, the city can revoke the HOA's charter. The fraud investigation already gives us standing." Another neighbor asked, "What happens to the dues we paid?" Raymond turned to face her. "We're pursuing restitution." With the lawsuit Graham initiated and the city's criminal case underway, there's a strong chance of recovery, especially if assets were misappropriated. I stepped up beside Marcus. "We're also setting up a neighborhood watch, not just for security, but to keep future power grabs from happening. No more closed-door decisions, no more fake violations." A cheer went up, not loud, not wild, but solid, like the start of something real. 2 nights later, I received a call from Detective Reams. She sounded more animated than before. "We arrested the HOA treasurer this afternoon," she said. "He tried to delete files when we showed up. We recovered most of them. It looks like Beverlyn wasn't acting alone. This was a coordinated scheme between her, the treasurer, and a third board member still under investigation." "Was it about money?" I asked, partially. "But it also looks like they were trying to leverage HOA funds into a private development plan. A side project involving land purchases outside the neighborhood. The HOA was just their funding source. Anything else?" She hesitated. "Yes." We found a list of residents labeled non-compliant risks. You were at the top. There were notes about surveillance schedules, footage to gather, and psychological profiles. My stomach turned. Profiles? Just guesses, notes about who might fight back, who might cave under pressure. They were profiling residents like enemies. I didn't respond right away. I just stared at the wall, trying to place how deep this had really gone. We're including everything in the charges, Reams said. Multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, wiretapping, and illegal surveillance. Beverly's facing serious time. I thanked her and hung up. Then I walked outside and looked up and down Willowbend. Porch lights were on, kids were riding scooters, and someone was grilling 2 houses down. It felt different now, not just safer but ours. The next week, the city council held a hearing. Marcus and I both spoke. So did Raymond and Mrs. Dobbins. We presented the petition, the evidence, and the signatures. The council voted unanimously. Ridge Bay Estates HOA was officially dissolved. The clubhouse would be auctioned off. The remaining funds, what hadn't been stolen, would be returned to residents. And a new community advisory group would be formed, this time elected by actual vote, with no power to fine or enforce, only to discuss and recommend. As we left City Hall, Marcus turned to me. "She cried when she got cited," he said. "Wonder how she handled the arrest." "She screamed," I replied, "but not like before. This time it was quiet, the kind of scream people do when they realize the game's over." He nodded. "That's the kind that sticks." I didn't smile, I didn't laugh. I just walked to my truck, turned the key, and drove home. Past the empty post where her HOA sign used to stand. Past the clubhouse with its locked doors. Past neighbors who waved without fear, and into a street that finally belonged to the people who lived there. I was laying a new row of slate tiles in the front walkway when the unmarked van rolled into the cul-de-sac. It was beige, nondescript, the kind of vehicle that either belonged to a cable repair tech or someone who didn't want to be noticed. But the driver didn't even pretend. He stepped out in a charcoal suit, flashed a Department of Justice badge to the pair of city auditors still cataloging boxes from the clubhouse, and disappeared inside with them. I stood up and dusted off my hands. That wasn't any city business. That was federal. The next morning, I got the call from Detective Reams. "We're escalating the case," she said. Turns out, the HOA's financial misconduct crossed state lines. The fake landscaping company received transfers from accounts based in Nevada and Colorado. Shell corporations with matching tax IDs. I leaned against the garage door. So Beverly was laundering through multiple states. She wasn't alone, Reams said. "We've identified 2 additional board members who were funneling money into personal LLCs disguised as service vendors. One of them owns a property management firm in Utah. The other is Beverly's cousin." That explained the out-of-state invoices we'd seen buried in the HOA's expense reports. They were siphoning money through fake vendors and bouncing it around the country. Organized fraud. "FBI's involved now," Reams added. "You'll probably see more suits around the neighborhood. They're going through everything." By the time the week ended, Willowbend looked like the set of a crime drama. A mobile command unit parked near the old clubhouse. Federal agents in polo shirts and earpieces carried out boxes of shredded paper, flash drives, and desktop towers. Orange evidence tags fluttered on folding tables. I didn't approach. I didn't need to. I'd already handed over everything I had. Then the indictments started rolling in. 4 former board members were charged with wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and identity theft. The last charge caught me off guard. But then I learned how they'd pulled off the annexation paperwork. They'd forged signatures using scans of resident leases and old HOA ballots documents they had full access to. They even faked a digital vote from Mrs. Dobbins, who hadn't touched a computer since 2011. The city council held a press briefing in front of the municipal building. I watched it from my shop while organizing lumber. "This was not a case of poor management," the mayor said. It was a deliberate, calculated effort to exploit homeowners, use public trust as a weapon, and manipulate legal boundaries for personal gain. The crowd behind him applauded. Not wildly, but with grim satisfaction. Like a wound was finally being cleaned. A week later, I got a certified letter not from the HOA, but from the Department of Justice. It was an official notification of victim status, part of the federal restitution process. Because of the attempted annexation, the illegal fines, and the forged documents, I qualified for compensation under federal law. I wasn't sure how much it would be. Didn't really matter. What mattered was that the law agreed. I hadn't just been harassed, I'd been targeted. A few days after that, I got a knock. It was Reams again, this time in plain clothes. She looked tired but satisfied. "They've agreed to a plea deal," she said. "All of them. 3 pled guilty. One's taking it to trial, but the evidence is strong. The ringleader, your former neighbor, will serve time. 2 of the others are looking at federal probation with asset seizure. The 4th might go away for longer." I didn't say anything right away. Just looked past her shoulder at the empty lot where the HOA sign used to sit. The city had cleared it out completely, no trace left. "Will they pay back the residents?" I asked. "Yes, the Dodge setting up a restitution fund. It won't be fast, but most of the stolen money has been traced. Property seizures are already in motion. And the fake vendors, dissolved. Licenses revoked. One's under separate investigation for tax evasion." I nodded. "That's something." She hesitated. "There's something else. During the investigation, we found a document in Beverland's storage unit. It was a handwritten list of addresses from other neighborhoods. Notes about their bylaws, their vulnerabilities. She was planning to replicate this in other HOAs. So this was her pilot program. She called it Phase 1 in her own notes. I blew out a breath. Glad we caught her before Phase 2. After she left, I walked to the end of the block and looked around. No security patrols. No laminated warnings. No HOA board meetings announced by megaphone speakers. Just neighbors mowing lawns, kids on bikes, and the smell of grilled onions from someone's back deck. It had taken months. It had taken lawyers, detectives, and federal agents. But the cul-de-sac was ours now. Not just legally, but in spirit. The community group that had replaced the HOA wasn't anything like the old guard. We didn't have fines. We didn't have power plays. We had a shared email list, a few volunteers who helped mow the community lot, and a retired electrician who fixed porch lights for free. A few weeks later, I was invited to the courthouse, not as a witness, not as a plaintiff, just as a guest. Beverland's sentencing had been moved up after she changed her plea to guilty. She stood in the courtroom in a dull gray suit, her hair tied back, hands clasped in front of her like a student waiting for detention. She didn't look at me once. The judge read off the charges, then the sentence: 5 years in federal prison, 2 with no parole, mandatory restitution, lifetime ban from holding any fiduciary position in a residential association. She didn't cry this time. She just stared straight ahead, blank. As I walked out of the courtroom, I passed a man in a tailored jacket holding a briefcase. Younger, tense. He looked like he hadn't slept. One of the other defendants. Probably waiting for his turn. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Outside, Marcus was leaning against my truck. He held up a small cooler. "Pulled pork," he said. "You hosting or me?" "My place," I said. "I just finished rebuilding the deck." He climbed into the passenger seat, and I started the engine. We drove back through the streets that had once been under siege by paper tyrants. We passed homes that were no longer afraid to hang wind chimes, to plant vegetable gardens, to paint their sheds. We passed driveways that no longer bore chalk marks from overnight inspections. And we turned onto Willow Bend, where the sun was sliding between the rooftops and the air smelled like freedom. No more screaming from behind sunglasses. No more crying when the law caught up. Just neighbors. Just homes. Just peace. And the knowledge that the gatekeepers had finally been locked out.